as you know, vaccines are complex biological products. And as a result of their complexity, vaccines are actually not stable outside of refrigerated storage conditions. You have to keep them in a fridge, or you have to keep them in deep freeze, and so on and so forth. And if you take them out of those storage conditions, they quickly perish and they lose their potency. And so the technology that we have developed actually allows vaccines to be stabilized so that they can be stored outside of these refrigerated and deep freeze conditions. As you know, that in a country like India, where we have huge challenges on infrastructure, logistics, we have unreliable power supply, and so on and so forth. You can imagine that if vaccines do not have proper storage conditions, then that can severely affect the access of these products. So we have been working on rotavirus vaccine, and we have actually done very extensive experimentation on rotavirus vaccine. And what we have found is that we can go as high as 45 Celsius in temperature, and we can store our vaccines for many months at that temperature, and there is no loss in potency. And that is a result of this unique formulation that we have developed for this vaccine. This work was done actually at Hilleman labs in India, and we invented the formulation, and we also developed the underlying technology for this vaccine. And the nice thing is that this underlying technology can actually be applied to other vaccines also. It was actually, it took us about approximately 2 years, 2 to 3 years to actually do this. It required some very extensive experimentation. So we tested through hundreds of formulations before we found the one that had the properties that I described. So in-house within Hilleman Labs, we're applying this technology to develop a cholera vaccine, and so we are also working on a heat-stable cholera vaccine. But we recently announced actually during the World Immunization Week that we would be very open to collaborating with other companies who might be working on measles vaccines or rabies vaccine or influenza vaccine or even polio vaccine. We really see three challenges. I think the first challenge is that anything innovative that we do, for example, we take an existing vaccine and we heat stabilize it. And again, you mentioned it's a vaccine product, it's not a consumer product, so it has to go through all the clinical testing, look at safety and so on and so forth. So one challenge is that the regulatory guidelines in many cases are not in place for something new and innovative. So we have to work very closely with the regulators to make sure that those guidelines are in place. That's one challenge. The second challenge is really the scale up. As you rightly pointed out, there are many inventions that look fantastic in the lab. But the moment you ask, how can these be industrialized? How can we make this in a factory at 100 million doses, right? And how can we still keep the process affordable and simple? That's right. And that is not always possible. The third challenge is that innovation and cost are actually opposing forces. So when you innovate something, the cost goes up. And so the big challenge that we have is how can we come up with affordable innovation? So for example, when we were looking at heat stabilization, there's a whole range of technologies that we could use, but ultimately we use freeze drying and spray drying because these are affordable technologies that we could apply to the vaccines.